So the expert on page 179 by Enrico Diego says, late summer sun spangled the leaf-littered ground of the pine woods where Katie and her cousin Jim strolled. Jim had a camera slung around his neck, and every few minutes he raised it to eye level and focused the lens. Back home, the woods were mostly hardwood, and the leaves gave out a different odor, mustier than the fresh green scent of pine. I'm still hoping to see a red-cockaded woodpecker, Jim commented, having snapped several more photographs. And I'd like you to show me some local plants and trees. That is, if you can identify them. Jim was several years older than Katie, and he was sure he knew a good deal more than a 10-year-old girl. If you hear a drumming sound, it might just be the species you're looking for, Katie advised, tugging at the bandana on her dark hair. A cloud of gnats swarmed around her head, thickening when she paused for more than a moment. Let's go ahead before any more bugs find us, she said, marching ahead of her cousin with determined strides. Jim chuckled to himself. A drumming sound. Right. As they followed a dirt path through the woods, Jim halted again to ask about a red stem bush with dark reddish berries. Those look good. I'm pretty sure we can safely eat those. He was already reaching out an eager hand to a fruit-laden stem. I wouldn't, Katie said hastily. That's pokeberry. Some botanists warn against eating the fruit. The roots are toxic, and the poison travels up to the leaves. When it says the roots are toxic, what does the word toxic mean? What?
Not good.
We got to do better than not good. You. It means poisonous. Thank you. Also, this, it says, I wouldn't, Katie said hastily. What does the word hastily mean?
Like in a hurry?
Yeah, hurriedly, quickly, yeah. There are 3 birds over there on that next bush, pecking away at the berries. If an animal eats something, doesn't that prove it isn't dangerous? Katie shook her head, wondering where to begin her cousin's education about the woods. It's highly debatable at what point a pokeberry plant becomes a danger to humans. Let's not take any risks, okay? Like Alice eating the mushroom in Wonderland, Jim suggested with a grin, and Katie took off again. Panting to keep up with Katie's surprisingly long stride, Jim asked, what kind of birds were those anyway? Not cardinals, I know. He read a magazine article about birds and was fairly sure he could identify a dozen or more common species of the woods. One was a bluebird. One was a mourning dove. The other was a mockingbird, the small gray bird. You know, they're called mockingbirds because they imitate the sounds of other birds. They can even mimic the noise of an insect. I should have taken a picture of it, Jim said, massaging his neck with a camera strap, rubbed his skin. Don't worry. The mockingbird is coming around this area. Let's go. I'll show you something interesting that you can photograph. The girl was all business now that she was in charge of the expedition. 10 minutes later, they came to a swamp, its murky water ringed by cypress trees. A mist rose from the water, and the splashing sounds, Katie explained, were most likely made by striped bass. Now, let's sit over on that log and wait quietly, and maybe we'll have the opportunity to see one of my favorite species. They sat for what seemed like hours, snacking on the raisins and almonds Katie had thought to provide for the hike. Obviously, Katie knew better than to risk snacking on food they found in the woods. Just when Jim began to get restless, Katie placed her small hand on his arm and directed his gaze to the far side of the swamp. A small flock of some large white birds swooped low over the water, responding to the ripples that broke upon the surface. Jim stared, almost neglecting to focus the lens of the camera, certain that he hadn't seen these creatures in his nature magazine. Katie whispered, Ibis, otherwise known as spoonbill. They're my favorite bird. Just look at that wingspan. They don't weigh more than a couple of pounds, but there's something so majestic about the way they can glide over the water. Jim remembered his mission before the flock got too far away, snapping photos from various angles, wanting to get even closer, although he knew it was impossible to do so without frightening the birds away from the area. That evening after dinner, Katie placed 2 well-thumbed volumes in her cousin's hands. Read these nature guides, and tomorrow we'll hike along another path where maybe we'll catch up with a red-cockaded woodpecker. With an impish grin that transformed her usually serious expression, Jim's cousin disappeared upstairs, leaving Jim to revise his opinions about his trip down south. All right, number one, in paragraph 12, when the author of the expert says that Katie is all business, what's the meaning of the phrase? What'd you get, Leslie? Katie acts like she's in charge, and she is. 2, part A. In the expert, what does the allusion, we've talked about allusions. This is with an A. A-L-L-U-S-I-O-N. It means a reference. What does the allusion to Alice in Wonderland suggest about Jim? What'd you get?
B.
Good, because that's the right answer. He's not convinced of Katie's superior knowledge, so he's kind of little, like Alice in Wonderland. Part B, what other sentence from the story supports the correct answer to A? Look at A. Jim was several years older than Katie. He was sure he knew a good deal more than a 10-year-old girl. Page 182. 2 parts. That's pokeberry, and some botanists warn against eating the fruit. What does the word botanist mean in this sentence? What'd you get, Caleb?
What number?
3A.
A.
That's right, it means plant scientist. And then you had to use the word that helped you figure it out. The answer for part B is also A. Did anybody get C, pokeberry? Second best answer. Second best answer. Just so you know. If you got worn or eating, I don't know what you were thinking. But fruit would be specifically it because, a pokeberry is apparently a type of berry, which maybe is a type of fruit that grows on a plant. But, when they start talking about fruits on plants, that lets you know that, okay, the fruit on the plant, a plant scientist is the botanist. Fruit's the better answer. Pokeberry is a close second. Underline the word, y'all. One word. Some of you underlined more than one word and you missed it. Underline the word that Katie uses to show that scientists don't really know the point at which a pokeberry plant is dangerous to humans. The answer is debatable. Should have underlined debatable. When I heard the learned astronomer. When I heard the learned astronomer, when the proofs, the figures, were ranged in columns before me, when I was shown the charts and the diagrams to add, divide, and measure them, when I, sitting, heard the astronomer, where he lectured with much applause in the lecture room, how soon, unaccountable, I became tired and sick, till rising and gliding out, I wandered off by myself in the mystical, moist night air, and from time to time looked up in perfect silence at the stars. Before we do the questions, could somebody just tell me what in the world is happening in this poem? Don't all volunteer at once. How about you, Isabel? Let's hear it.
It's like someone sitting in a room.
Someone is sitting in a classroom. Keep going.
Hearing someone lecture.
That's right. Our writer, what does he think about the person lecturing?
He's boring.
He's boring.
He does not like the lecturer at all. He thinks that the person is boring. Okay? Bree, did you want to say something? So then he says, I became tired and sick. I think he just means bored. He's not becoming sick. It's not like he got a fever and vomited, Till rising and gliding out, I wandered off by myself in the mystical, moist night air, and from time to time looked up in perfect silence at the stars. He's saying, this scientist, this astronomer was so smart, and he knew all this information about planets and stars and, things in the sky, right? But this scientist, this astronomer never really just enjoyed this stuff. And that's what our narrator found most bothersome. Number 5, when the speaker calls the lecturer the learned astronomer in line 1 of the poem, what are the 2 possible meanings of the phrase? The answers are B and C. That the astronomer knows a lot of facts about his subject area, that the astronomer lacks imagination. By the way, E wasn't a terrible answer, it just wasn't correct. A and D weren't even in the same planet. Circle the box words or phrases. Here we go. The phrase perfect silence has a positive connotation. Perfect silence sounds good. If something's perfect, that's good, right? The phrase perfect silence has a positive connotation that is opposite of the connotation of the charts and diagrams. He did not like the charts and diagrams. They were negative. 7. 2 phrases that show the 2 different points of view in the reaction to the astronomer's lecture. The applause in the lecture room, and then the difference is, I became sick and tired. Okay? One group loves it. This guy's like, my God, this is horrible. Yes, dear.
I picked that. If you want to, oh Lord, have mercy, I realized I preached it.
Okay. Now, the next part for the boxes. Under the expert, you're going to do the bottom 3. Okay? You don't do the top one, but you do the bottom 3. By the way, look at the last one. Switches from moment to moment by using paragraphs. Wasn't that kind of obvious? And then under the learned astronomer, the first and the third. Okay? Grade mistakes? Questions, comments, expostulations? Okay, cool. We're done.